So excited to have Taune here with us today. So for anybody who's not watching this live, but might be listening, because we're going to turn this into a podcast episode as well, Taune is a friend, a colleague, an ex-tat labber with us. She is lovely and hella intelligent and smart, and also a fellow depth-based therapist. So we all speak the same language and I think have a similar soul calling, if I do say so myself.
100%.
So Taune, last week you posted something on your Instagram that I immediately shared with Dené and immediately responded to you about. And I was like, holy shit, yes. Can we have a conversation with this? Because it feels like it's really alive in the collective right now. I know it's alive for me personally, so I'm very open about this stuff, but I'll just say it here again that John and I just recently started seeing a new couples therapist, because therapists should also be doing their own work, right? And she has us listening to, because it's only on audio, Stan Tatkin's book, Your Brain on Love. And I don't mean to call you out, Stan, but there is a lot of that book that I'm having a really hard time with.
With love, Stan.
With love. Much of it is amazing, and I'm taking notes, and I'm like, this is great. I can't wait to implement this. But there's about 25% of it that feels really codependent to me, and I'm struggling. And so when you wrote that, I was like, oh my God, like, let's talk about this. So can we start by, I don't know if you have that screenshot up, because I'm literally going to make you read your own words, but can you?
Oh my God, I don't. Let me see.
Okay, wait, I have it on my computer. Hang on. Let me move my phone a little bit. I'm going to read this all for y'all. So 1 second. So the post that I'm talking about, so Taune posted, y'all, some of the codependency talk I see on here, meaning Instagram, feels like patriarchy wearing new shoes. Oof. Boundaries equals 100% yes. Overgiving equals 100% no. Hyper-individualism, quote, I can't make you feel anything, and, quote, I don't owe you accountability rhetoric. Wait, what? Come on now. You know we impact one another deeply. To deny that is to deny our interdependence. It's to deny our feeling selves. That's what we've already been doing. So just like let that sink in, anybody who's listening. Okay, I want to start, Dené. I don't know if you have anything, but I want Taune, I want you to take me through, I guess, like what motivated that post, and also kind of like where you were at when you wrote it. Because I'm feeling all my own feels, but I want to know kind of from the head that wrote that, from the mouth that wrote that, what was going on.
Yeah, I'm actually really curious what you're experiencing right now.
Hang on, somebody's asking to repeat it, so I think this is a good thing. So they can't pause and go back. Okay, I'm going to read it one more time. Y'all, some of the codependency talk I see on here feels like patriarchy wearing new shoes. Boundaries equals 100% yes. Overgiving equals 100% no. Hyper-individualism, I can't make you feel anything, and I don't owe you accountability rhetoric. Wait, what? Come on now. You know we impact one another deeply. To deny that is to deny our interdependence. It's to deny our feeling selves. That's what we've already been doing.
Yeah, I'm so curious if we might be on different ends of this right now. So you read that, because I'm like, oh shit.
I just came on to the debate with Vanessa and Dené. Is that what's happening in your head?
I mean, I'm in.
Sorry, like, let's do
There's
it.
a lot of love here.
And here's the thing, like, I agree with you, and it feels like a big and on this one, right?
Wait, today, I want Taune to take us through her thinking before we take you through ours. So I want to hear from you, Taune. Where were you at? What was, like, what kind of predated or like, I guess, helped you conceptualize that thought and put it out there in the world, right? Because I'm very curious about this.
There was one post in particular, and they were saying that there isn't a need for accountability, basically. And I've seen this a lot in certain like counterculture, subculture, especially kind of as a rebuttal to codependency. So there are lots of folks who are more relationship anarchists or polyamorous through that view of I don't want to be owned. I don't believe in the concept of like romantic love in the way that we've learned about it, right? Which there's a lot of beauty and a lot of truth depending on who you are in that, right? but there's also this kind of your feelings are your feelings and I can't make you feel anything that actually feels more akin to patriarchal toxic culture that we've grown up in. And basically you have your feelings, they're your fucking feelings, deal with them by yourself, and I'll deal with mine, which is basically just feeling to me like a severing of connection, more like a disconnection dance in a way, which is Sue Johnson's language, which, okay, she's attachment based, but so I've just like, I'm curious more about straddling the between here of what if we look at things through a lens of connection leaning with ourselves and other people instead of you versus me, which that's a lot of what I'm seeing feels like right now.
That's a really good way to put it. Yeah, connection leaning.
And when you say more, Taune, about why you say that it feels like a continuance of patriarchy, like I feel like I'm hearing you say it feels like a very like wounded masculine like competition, like, you know, you against me. Is that what you mean when you say that? Yeah, and
I'm looking at it more through a framework of like wounded domination based. Like
it feels very control based.
Control based, of like, no, I'm in the right here. I'm allowed to say whatever I want to say, and you're going to have to deal with it. Almost like I don't want to hear about the impact. I'm going to turn my comments off on Instagram, which everybody can have boundaries, but when boundaries become an inability to connect and to have almost like restorative justice in a way, then I get really curious about, is that just a way to keep a power position? And to not need to hear multiple points of view, and then how can we actually grow?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you think about it relationally versus sort of on a collective level, or if we're talking about people with public platforms, right? And I definitely, like, I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you. And the "and" to me is, you know, boundaries to me are always about like personal responsibility, right? So whatever boundary I set is what I'm going to do about the situation if it doesn't change. It's not, I need you to change. And I think sometimes
can you repeat that, Dené? Because I think that's actually, I agree with you, and I think that's actually a new concept for a lot of people with boundaries. Like, I do think that we've talked too much about boundaries almost being like that you need to do this or don't do this, rather than it's really more about you. So will you kind of reiterate that?
Yeah, I think, you know, a lot of the way that I hear people talk about boundaries in alignment with what Tawny's saying, to me, can sort of be another form of an attempt to control another person. I believe that boundaries are around personal responsibility. And so I set this boundary sort of for myself, and I decide how I am going to interact in this relationship if the dynamic doesn't change. Now, I can certainly speak to how this dynamic feels for me, but we don't have the ability to control other people, as far as I know. And so it becomes more about, if this is what the dynamic is going to be, this is how I am going to shift my behavior or shift our dynamic in this interaction, right?
Right.
And so I guess with what you're saying, because again, like, I think it feels like a little bit of a different thing. And I kind of agree with you. If you're going to like put your stance on a personal platform and sort of like, you know, and nobody gets to comment, like, I mean, listen, people can unfollow you if that's not really like something that's in alignment with them. But here's where I struggle. And I want to name that, like, my work is always like coming back, like my pendulum tends to swing a little bit more towards the hyper independence. So I will own that and say that a lot of times my work is coming back into the vulnerability and the connection and allowing for that vulnerability. So I understand that I sometimes skew that way. And I feel like, to me, it always comes back to discernment and personal responsibility. And that is the piece that it's like, if someone is saying to me, in the example that you gave, and I'd be curious to hear about your thoughts, your feelings are not my responsibility, right? Like, so you get to own that, or whatever they're saying. I think that, to me, becomes an opportunity for me to use my own discernment and sort of say, where this person is feels guarded, feels like they are not able to connect. My work is about really understanding why I want to continue to like reach for and control and maybe be in a relationship that's not supportive of me. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What do you think, Taune?
I mean, I'm going to attachment woundings here, right? Like, first of all, I want to say, I think we all probably, the three of us, from what I know, lean historically more into withdrawing. And so that's why I'm so interested in connection, because I think for me, it feels much safer to isolate away from connection. It's scary to connect and to be dropped. And I really love the wisdom that you're bringing in here, Dené, because there's a real love of self in a way to say, oh, this person can't meet me. And so I have to choose myself and love myself. I think that's what I'm hearing. And I also find that in my own work sometimes be very challenging, because going back to attachment, there is that kind of imago potential to heal previous woundings if that person eventually shows up. And then that can lean into more of, if we want to pathologize, like codependency. So it's like, I think that's again like where the straddling comes in for me, is how much of myself am I willing to give? And then can I reframe it too as a learning experience for me? And then if it's no longer healthy for me, of course, like leaving. But
I love that I jumped to the exit. But will you say more, Taune, about pathologizing codependency? Because my ears sort of perked up as you said that with a lot of curiosity.
Yeah. Well, I just feel like, especially in the age of Instagram and social media, there's so much good that comes from it. We met each other through here, and there's a lot of like black and white narratives around mental health, emotional well-being. That's what gets clicks, right? So a lot of the codependency stuff is I can almost feel that I saw somebody on here say weaponizing boundaries. And sometimes I've heard clients, and also I've been this person, to say, no, you're codependent, no, you're a narcissist, no, you have this or that. And I'm more interested actually not using those words personally and trying to explain it with I language of what's happening inside of me in response to you. And what was that?
Yeah, I'm just curious if, like, for people listening, if you can give an example of what that might look like in a conversation. Do you know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. I guess the most recent one that I can think of is somebody being incredibly dismissive, and I could have used pathologizing language for things that I know about them, and instead I actually try to go to more of a nonviolent communication place of when you said this thing that I don't really want to say on an Instagram live to me, I felt really sad and ashamed. And I also felt a part of me very angry that felt like intergenerational rage at men. So I named all the parts in me. And I'd like to stay in connection with you, but I want to hear that you know where I'm coming from. I want to hear where you're coming from, and I want to see if we can find a solution together on how to relate. Or I need to not be in communication with you right now, right? So it's like, instead of me being like, you're an asshole, you're a misogynist, which, like, I've totally said these things, you guys, in the past, right? Like, or you're codependent or whatever, like, that's actually not helpful, right? And then usually that defensiveness is going to come up. So I want to speak more to, like, ouch, that really hurts me, and I feel scared and I feel angry, and can you come forward here with me? And also, what's happening with you?
Can I say really quick, I agree with you, Taune. I do, and I've said this too, like, I find it to be very off-putting how often now, especially on social media, we're using clinical language. First of all, it's all been watered down, but clinical language essentially to finger point and label other people, right? What I will say in my own experience is that using clinical language in the proper way, with the research kind of done around what it actually means and the weight that it actually carries, is helpful for me personally, not to label somebody else necessarily, especially like to their face, but as an understanding of where I sit on the spectrum, where, and where maybe my wounding, especially from a past relationship, might have impacted me. So in that way, I feel like it's really helpful. The way that I speak about codependency is I believe we're all codependent. So I don't think anybody should be running around using codependent or codependency as some kind of dirty word when everybody collectively needs to look in the mirror, because we're all relating to each other to a certain extent, some more than others, from a codependent place, right? So I actually think, and narcissism too, to a certain extent, right? Like, we're all narcissistic, y'all. To a certain extent, we're all a little narcissistic. So I think it's more about, can you take it and look in the mirror when you feel the kind of the push or the wanting to finger point and put a label on somebody. I would say, let's get more curious and turn around and say, like, why is that? Like, what's coming up for me that's making me want to other and make that person bad and label them in a bad way, right?
Yeah. 100%.
And I love the language you used, Taune, in the example, because I think, to Vanessa's point, we come from a depth psychology background, all three of us, which is, it's just the way of looking at things through a psychological lens where we don't tend, I feel like we try to step away from the pathologizing a little bit more and stay in the space of curiosity. And I think the minute that I see you as a narcissist, you're not human to me anymore, right? Like, I'm not seeing the layers of wounding underneath this, this pain point that is making you act this way. And we are all in our own ways narcissistic. And normally it's always fear that is making me label and defend and want to push someone away. And normally the easy thing is the cutoff, right? Like that's the easier step, to say, like, this person is out, I'm done. And even as you were sort of speaking in that vulnerable space of how you spoke to someone, I could feel it in my body. And I just think it's sometimes important to name how hard it is to be in the space of vulnerability, because every part of our nervous system wants to resist and be like, no, it's not safe.
Protect yourself.
And it's such, like, we're not saying this is easy work. But I do think that we really get to a space of dehumanizing one another when we don't do that work.
Yes.
So let me get your thoughts on this, Taune, because Dené and I have been like batting this around. So let me tell you the 2 points in our friend Stan's book that
you're gonna see this and be like, women talking.
Okay, so the first one was that your partner, you should share everything with each other, and they should know everything about you, basically, like this whole no secrets, but like they should know everything. And then the second one was they should have access to you 24/7. And I was like, I like rage. Like, I literally was like like a cat, my hackles went up, and I was like, get out of here with this bullshit. I mean, Dené knows I lost my mind. Even John knows, because he walked into the room, poor John, I was like, this is bullshit. I'm like, my first gut response. But, and listen, Stan is also attachment based. So I do feel a little bit like, and I know you know this because you're very well versed in the attachment world. To me, it feels a little bit like we've got to find that middle ground. Like, I think there's been so much amazing growth and understanding of the human connection based in attachment and understanding the attachment theory and the attachment model. And actually, even the way that he talks about it, it's so much new information for me that I didn't even learn. I mean, we barely learned about this in grad school, right? It's been mostly us having to do our own research. And so it's been really helpful. And I think it can be taken too far, right? I think it can be used as a way to actually mask a lot of codependent behaviors in relationships. And I think usually Esther Perel is the one that I tend to fall to, which is when she says, like, we're too focused on attachment based in this society, right? Which I agree with. And so then I guess my question to you, I don't know if you know the answer to this, but like, what do we feel like that middle ground is? Because I think there's so much amazingness from attachment theory, just the model and using that, but I don't know what that middle ground is, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's so much there, first of all. I think that it's going to depend, of course, individually, right? But I think of Esther Perel, of course, like you mentioned, and I know Taune you love, and also David Schnark, like the differentiation based. And the idea being like, we need that strangeness for passion long term or eroticism long term. And I think like to live in both of those worlds is to have a consistent inquiry with ourselves, at least how I see it, of how in connection am I with myself right now?
Yes.
And how in connection am I feeling with this person? Because when you were mentioning those two things from the book, I was thinking about how sometimes people will feel like they'll feel safer after betrayal. They're always checking their partner's phone or something. Right. And you've made posts about that, Vanessa. And it's like, no, that's not going to make you feel safer. You know, you need to actually dig deeper to the foundation and check in with, am I abandoning myself and trying to soothe through this relationship? Or am I leaning so far into my own independency that I'm no longer feeling close? You know, it's like, I don't know that there's an easy answer. It's more like the more we know ourselves, maybe not the more we love ourselves, but the more we know ourselves, the more we can actually know and be in connection with our partners.
Yeah. I mean, I love that. I think that's what's sort of underneath those statements that Vanessa was saying, right? Like, there's a lack of trust in myself and the fact that I will be okay no matter what. And I feel like whenever I'm working with someone who's sort of navigating a betrayal, what we do is we go through where you've been here before and how you got through it and you had your back and you were okay. And like, how do we sort of remind the psyche that will be the case again, right? But when I don't trust in that, I feel the need to try to cling. And I always come back to the challenging aspect for me about like attachment-based models that are based on what I'm afraid of. And I would argue, sorry, Stan, that is based on what I'm afraid of, is that I'm not actually seeing the person in front of me in those moments. That's not actually about them. It's about what's happening within me and my inability to self-regulate in this moment. And I need you to do that for me. But what if there's like a ton of stuff happening inside of your partner as well? And I see that as consistently being the challenge with some of the more attachment-based ways of doing this work is we can just get so in the space of, I need this other person to regulate, that we are completely disconnected to how that feels for the other person I'm in relationship with, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what happens when that person is going through their own stuff, which we will, because life is hard.
We all are, always.
And so they can't show up for us in the way that we need / expect them to / attachment model has told us they should do in order to be securely attached. And then, so then what happens? So then you feel betrayed by that person. You feel abandoned, right? You feel your attachment wounding being reactivated, because a lot of what he speaks to is how like we need to be perpetually forever and ever in our romantic relationships. We're going to be reparenting each other, which is another statement that made me cringe. I get the concept of anyone we're in close relationship with to a certain extent is going to be mirroring back to us a lot of our attachment wounding and kind of allowing us fodder to reparent ourselves. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily that it's their job to reparent. I think that is actually, very dangerous language, because to your point, Dené, it puts a lot of pressure and a lot of ownership and responsibility on somebody that's not you, and you don't have any control over somebody else. I don't care how deeply and securely attached you are as a partnership, that person could die. Right? Mm-hmm. So like, then what happens to that? It makes me feel like you're going to be kind of left out there without a tether, without an anchor, because you have now almost like signed away that reparenting to somebody outside of self.
Yeah.
What do you think, Taune?
Yeah, I know. It's hard because like my little introvert heart is like has so many things happening inside of me, and I'm like, how do I communicate this?
I know Vanessa and I can be sort of like,
I love it.
We absolutely know that. We get that about the way that we speak with one another.
I love it. Yeah.
I think what I would be curious to hear your thoughts on, and I always come back to this, and I don't come from a more attachment-based understanding, so tell me what you think. What I always struggle with is entitlement around the idea of like for instance, I called Vanessa yesterday with like, I was struggling with something, I was scared. She like really held space and contained in like a very nurturing way for me, right? I didn't expect her to do that. Like, what I think is often the challenge that I see in relationships is, this is your job to reparent me. This is your job to show up for me all the time when I'm struggling with anything, right? Like, I think when and if we can do that for one another, oh my God, is there such unbelievable healing that comes from that. But anybody who's been a parent knows your kid does not give a shit how you are feeling, what is happening in your internal world, whether it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you haven't slept in days, they don't care about you. Like, don't care. And I feel like a lot of times where I struggle with the attachment-based models is we are sort of attempting to meet our partners in that same, I don't care how you feel. I don't care what's happening for you. And I would be curious to hear what that brings up for you or what your thoughts are.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I don't have that experience, even clinically. And Dené, you and I have talked about this, how sometimes, I don't know if it's like Bay versus LA or what, like,
everybody's
we're gonna have to figure this out. Yes, everybody is hyper-independent, I feel. Yeah.
And hella codependent in LA, that makes sense. That tracks.
Maybe, yeah. Yeah, it's like, it's totally different. Like, it's harder to lean into connection. And, you know, the dating worlds for people can feel hard to actually feel connected, even after years. Which that could also be a codependent thing too, right? But what comes up for me with attachment is, and also differentiation, is just what does security feel like and look like? Just going back to that foundational principle of, what does it feel like actually in your body to feel secure with another person and with yourself? And when you start to feel insecure in yourself, are you reaching out to have that person to use that language reparent you? And sometimes we need that. Co-regulation is very important, right? But if it's consistently happening and it's happening as an expectation, then that totally seems like, first of all, a relationship that wouldn't probably feel very sexual or erotic unless that's your kink and it's consenting. But yeah, that's a totally different power dynamic of take care of me. And I actually have seen something somewhat similar to that, yes, between like a woman who's taking care of a man. I've seen that quite a bit. And that's challenging, of course. You know, it's like, how can you feel like this isn't your baby in a way, even though it's your baby? It's like the other person has to have the personal responsibility piece. Both people do. But then I always wonder, how can you lean more into, and I don't know exactly how to put this, but like, I guess just lean more into the heart, even when we're needing individuation. Like, if I'm moving away from connection because I need it, am I still in touch with my heart in that moment? Or am I blocking off? And that's kind of ethereal, but I do check in with myself. Like, does my heart feel congested?
No, that landed hard for me, Taune, because I mean, listen, and I don't think it's any surprise to anybody who knows me that I'm the island, as Stan would call it. I definitely tend to be more avoidant, right, in my nature. And that middle ground that we were speaking to really for me tends to be, am I doing what feels best for me right now because this is what feels normal and natural based on my attachment wounding, which would be to close off, pull in, not lean into vulnerability, disconnect, all of these things. Or a way for me to lean into more of what maybe he needs from me in this moment, which feels really uncomfortable and hard for me, but also uncomfortable and hard in a good way, like in an expansive way, in a stretching me way, in a growing edge kind of way, right? In an inferior function kind of way. And there's never a right or wrong answer. It's usually a little bit of like 1 step forward, 2 steps back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right? And I also think that's part of it, is that we as people, as a society, have to get more familiar and comfortable with, there's no right or wrong. There's no black or white. There's no one size fits all. This is going to be, and it's not even a one size fits all in your relationship, right? Like, day by day, it might be different. I might feel more open and heart-centered and connected one day, and the next day I don't. And so I respond to maybe his reaching out for affection in a different way. But I think the losing of the nuance and the lack of appreciation for that person being their own person going through their own shit at any individual moment, really strips away a layer of an ability to connect, because now I'm connecting with what I expect you to be based on history versus who you are minute by minute. And there's no curiosity in that. There's no dance in that. There's no I see you for who you are in that, right? It becomes like I see you in the box that I think you should be in, or have always been in. And so, I don't know, that's just something that came up when you said that landed.
I feel so impacted by that.
Yeah. I think, you know, what came up for me as you were saying that, V, is that it feels like so often it's an invitation back into presence. And if we look at whatever the relationship is, because I was thinking, and Taune does a really beautiful job speaking to, and if you don't follow Taune, her content is amazing, but I think you do a really beautiful job of sort of speaking to how we're reinforcing a lot of our attachment wounds through the dating process. And I do think that there is something that is a little bit different than what we're reinforcing in dating versus what we're doing when we're in a committed long-term relationship, and that there is a level of discernment that sometimes we aren't using, or like we need to slow things down a little bit. I talk to clients a lot about, but I think that either way, it becomes an invitation to be really present with myself and whatever this dynamic is has sort of come into my sphere. And this is where, you know, we get a little ethereal as we talk about it, but like, what has this relationship come into my life to display about me, about like where my wounds are still being activated, and can this be an invitation for me to do the next right thing based on what's coming up in the present moment, right?
Yeah. So I love what both of you are saying, because it feels more relational, and it feels like actually seeing other people as humans on the journey, like a soul journey with us, as opposed to you fit into this puzzle that I'm making of my life, which feels like not looking at anything with curiosity. And then track that 10 years down the road, you're probably going to be resentful and not even enjoy the person in front of you or yourself, right? It's like there's this day-to-day, moment-to-moment relearning of ourselves and each other and the lessons that we get to learn. Like, it's exciting in dating and relationships. Yeah, and I hear you both really alluding to that. Maybe not the excitement part, but the learning part. The growth part.
I do think it's exciting, and I think that I love what you just said. I'm going to quote you on that, Taune, because I think that is the patriarchal wounding, is feeling like another person is meant to be a piece in my life's puzzle versus another soul on their own journey. And I could not feel more passionate about the same thing, that when we witness this as like, neither of us belong to one another ever. Each of us are individual souls on our own journey, and how do we hold one another with a little more grace when that is the case, right? But yeah, I just think that's a different energetic when you hold it that way.
Yeah.
Can I read a couple questions that we got? So I sent out a call. I said, everybody, you know, we were doing this live and this recording, and so I wanted to see if anybody had any specific questions around this topic. So there was a couple of them, and I just use this opportunity and all the three brains combined here to talk about this, and the three souls combined. Okay, so this is an interesting one. So unhealthy control. We spoke to this a little bit, but unhealthy control versus boundaries, right? So we talked about this in the beginning. And then this person specifically says, not being okay with bae Insta following naked girls. Where does that fall?
Bae. Well, I'm such an old lady. I want to hear what Taune's thoughts are. Your thoughts about that? You know,
okay.
I was just listening to Preston Smiley, which I'm kind of obsessed with his content right now, and he was talking about like how often from our space of wounding, we're not looking at the other person's space of wounding, meaning we as women sort of have our own wounding quite often. Don't trust a man can't be trusted, men are dogs, narrative, right? And we don't really lean into what it feels like for a man when we come at them with, you're looking at this girl on Instagram, what kind of a man are you, all of this stuff, which can be really like assaulting on their personhood, right? And so a little bit, I would say what Taune said earlier, right? Like when I see these girls, I tell myself the story that I'm not what you desire. I think that maybe you want a girl who looks like something that doesn't look like me, and it sort of flares up my insecurities, and I just want to bring that to you. But I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it feels like what I said about the phone, right? And like we were talking about, Taune, like the checking of the phone. It feels very similar to me, this conversation. And I have very similar feelings around porn, although I can definitely have the conversation around ethical porn versus non-ethical porn. I get that entirely. And that is definitely a worthy conversation when it comes to, I don't like my partner watching porn. And then we talk about ethical, that I get. But if it's strictly around this idea of they're looking at somebody else that's not me, and how, if that's really the crux of it, they're looking at somebody else that's not me, somebody that doesn't look like me, to your point today, then that's a conversation for us to talk about you and your insecurity and what's coming up for you. That's not about the other person. That's actually about bringing it back to the self, right? And so, I mean, that's just kind of where I go with it.
Yeah, I just want to add something too, that I do think we're in a space and time where there is a need for us to challenge some of our, again, patriarchal wounding around how we have been conditioned to hold sex and sensuality, and that, you know, like this puritanist idea that like, when you love someone, that means that you're never supposed to have an erotic charge towards anyone else for the rest of your life. It's not realistic. I would say it's a little bit childlike. And sometimes I think there's an invitation to be in curiosity, like Vanessa said, about what this is bringing up for me. But then also, can we use this as an opportunity to connect? Like, that's not that person. And I'm not saying, like, if that's a boundary, you're wrong for having that. But can I be curious about why that boundary feels so important to me versus just like the hard line of you can't ever look at another person and be, you know, turned on, or that means you don't love me. It's just, I feel like we got to outgrow that a little bit. You know?
Ooh, boy, let me tell you, this is one of the videos that John and I did probably about a year ago. We did a live around this, and people lost their ever-loving minds. We got more like angry responses to John and I basically saying exactly what you're saying, Dené, than probably any other video we've ever done, because this is a really hard thing in this culture, as the puritanical culture that we live in, for people to really wrap their head around, which is, I don't own you. And you are going to have sexual fantasy and sexual erotic draw and attraction to other people outside of myself. It is human nature, period. Hard stop. And people really have a hard time with it. And I get it. And we could do a whole episode on that one.
Well, because we can't selectively numb. And if I have to shut that down, how am I going to continue to have an electric or an erotic charge towards you? Sorry, Taune, I didn't mean to jump in.
Dené and I are just going back and forth. Like, Taune, what do you think?
Taune's like, I would like to say something.
No, I mean, I'm so glad that you're bringing in the patriarchal wound again, because another piece of that is we're also conditioned as women to compete for men's attention and to compare. And so if my partner finds you too beautiful, then I must not be beautiful, and I'm not good enough, and then I'm not worthy. And so that like consistently comes up, right? And that's one of the reasons why I really love the idea, and this is going to be very triggering, so trigger warning, but like not literally, but like sister wives in a way.
Trigger warning before she said sister wives.
Wait, why can't we get like...
But sister wives to the universe, sister wives to whoever, but just like really healing that wound there, or brother husbands or whatever.
I was like, come on, why did they get all the women? Can we have multiple men up in this?
I said brother husband. I said brother husband. Like we can all be. But I'm here for that though. I don't want to be a part of a harem. That's a whole other conversation. But
I'm not opposed to that, but maybe that's my island like tendencies.
I'm crying. I had this conversation with John, and I was like, "Who has time for all of this? Like, I don't understand. I can't even get my laundry done. You guys are juggling multiple." Anyway, sorry.
I know, but looking at it another way, like even if you don't have sex with multiple people, like if you're living in community, it is emotional polyamory. If you look at it. like I definitely look at my life that way, right? So I'm totally getting away from the point in a way. Maybe not. Oh my God,
The power's back.
But see, actually, we have you, Taune, and here's something I want to ask you, because I feel like you are more well versed in the polyamory community and, like, you know, just like how. Anyway, here's my question. I feel like a lot of times there is a tension that builds in relationships where if we have the release valve of another person in this partnership, or there's like a triangulation, or however that works, do you find that sometimes that gives people an out where they're sort of like escaping the tension, not staying in the discomfort with one another to work it out in a way that, I don't know, just like, to me, I wonder if sometimes that can be a form of escapism or distraction.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a huge reason why, a huge challenge that I have in that kind of relationship structure. Another one being patriarchy, but that's for a whole other time. But I also think, though, that can come up in relationships that are monogamous. You can drink, you can lean on other friends, you can do drugs, you can you can watch TV, you can watch porn. Like, there's so many other social media, right? Yeah. Like, but there is something that can be very triggering, and I think needs to be looked at, and isn't often looked at in my experience, of using other people in that way. And I specifically get really upset because of intergenerational trauma with women being used in that way. Mm-hmm. To quell that emotional discomfort, distraught, whatever. So again, one of those no easy answers. Mm-hmm. But
yeah,
it takes a.
But I'm glad I asked you that, because that makes sense, and I do think we distract in other ways, and so yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. Okay, so the other next question is, and I think all of us are going to unequivocally say yes, but I think it's worth talking about a little bit more. Can you be codependent in friendship?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. The short answer is yes, but maybe we can talk about this a little more, right? Because what we're really saying is, right, if we say that the act of or being codependent or codependence is I use somebody else, right? I regulate my emotional state through somebody else. I find my sense of worth, my sense of value outside of myself, right? In somebody else. Then that can be anybody. I mean, that can be that you have a lot of codependent parental relationships. There's a lot of codependent work relationships, right? It can really be any relationship. And to Tawny's point, when you're talking about, it could be alcohol, it could be drugs. You know, I always say one person's Jack and Coke is another person's people pleasing. It really just depends on what do you use to regulate yourself, right? What or who. And so who could be anybody.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And by the way, once a codependent, always a codependent. I love to talk about that too, because a lot of times people are like, I'm only codependent in this one relationship. And I'm like, nah, that's not how it works. If you're codependent in your relationship with, let's say, partner, then you're also codependent most likely across the board. It might just manifest differently in behavior. So the way that your codependency looks might be slightly different. But if you're using somebody else to find that sense of worth, that sense of emotional, whatever, then you'll probably have a tendency to do that across the board. That's just my opinion.
I love what Taune said, and I'm going to start incorporating this more. So thank you for that, Taune. I think there is power in sometimes removing some of these labels, in that, like, these tendencies are human tendencies. Mm-hmm. These are things that we do when we feel afraid, versus like, you're a codependent, which
you're an addict.
All are, like,
which we talked about.
We're all addicts, like, but these are the human ways that we attempt to negotiate pain. And if we sort of normalize that, I think there's a little bit less resistance to taking our own ownership and our 100% of the way that we're showing up relationally, right?
Yes, totally. Yeah. I also, this was different, but I felt kind of sad hearing that question. Because it almost seems like there's an idea there that partnerships are somehow the only area to have codependency, and therefore almost like, and I don't know if I'm reading into it too much, but almost like other relationships aren't as important, when in reality I think that's not to blame this person, but I actually see that as a feature of codependency.
and not seeing the networks of community as just as important. Like oftentimes friendships will last longer than partnerships, right? So those could be the people that we are more codependent with or more dependent on in a way that isn't healthy for us. So
yeah,
I don't know.
That's fair. Okay, so I have one more, and again, we kind of spoke to this a little bit, so we'll kind of succinctly address this person's question. So she said, isn't hyper independence just anti-dependence, the teenage-like state, according to Pia Melody? I mean, it's a yes and. I think Pia Melody, I don't know if either of you are familiar with her writing on anti-dependence, but she does talk about it, and Dené, you speak about it like this too. It just kind of being more of a juvenile way of relating. And I think that actually I think if I remember it correctly, it's been a while since I've read her books, but I'm pretty sure she talks about any of these more quote unquote extremes being more of a teenage, adolescent way of relating. And I think it's really just more about this kind of attachment wounding, the cutoff from continuing to develop emotionally, and then what kind of becomes your way to self-soothe, right? So my way to self-soothe might be the anti-dependence or might be the hyper-independence, right? Which all three of us kind of fall into. Somebody else's might be what we would see on more of the anxious spectrum, right? So the kind of clinging or losing yourself. Because that's the thing too, a lot of people think that codependence has to mean that you lose yourself in another person. And I don't actually see it that way, because I don't see that you're going to have somebody who's on one side of the attachment spectrum only exhibiting codependent behavior. Because to your point, Dené, this is it's kind of a human thing. We all do this in different ways. It's just, how does it manifest in behavior? I don't know if that made sense.
Yeah. What are you going to say, Taune? I feel like I keep talking on top of Taune.
No. I think this is going to sound judgy, but I think that maybe most people are probably still in that state and collectively
totally agree.
Right? Like we can have all these ideals for conscious relationships, but as you were saying, like if we're emotionally still in the space of teenagehood, that's probably where we're going to be reacting from until we can respond, which isn't, we're not going to be able to respond perfectly all the time. There's also another piece that I want to bring in there around gender, but I want to hear what you have to say, Dené.
Well, here's my thoughts, and this is something that I've been like writing about and working through, and I'm a little bit, I think it is important for us to distinguish between the word dependence, okay, let me back up. I think it becomes important for us to make the differentiation between the word dependent, independent, and dependency, right? Or hyper independent and hyper dependency, like independency, right? Like, because I think to me, and it feels like I'm sort of like, what's the word when you're like picking at some, like, thank you. Vanessa finishes my sentences a lot, guys. It feels like I'm being nitpicky, but I feel like there's a difference, right? And to me, dependency and this, I was saying in Live with Vanessa last week, is a little bit that I come from like an addiction background. And I think that like when we think about when we have a dependency on anything, it is, I am not okay if this thing is not here. Now, my independence is a different conversation to me, right? Like I think being hyper independent, like I cannot be in relationship. Yes, that's not a great thing, but I do think like having a sense of independence and that I don't have a dependency on anything outside of myself. I don't actually know that that's a bad thing. And I would say, I don't think most people are, like really independent. I think most people have dependency on different distractions, right? I find that most people actually don't have the ability, even when they're more avoidant, to sit in the space of my alone. They will use drugs and alcohol and new people and all kinds of other things to distract from the space of, I am actually okay in my skin by myself, which is not the same thing as like being independent to me. It's still a form of dependency on something external. Am I making sense? Are you guys like, and how do you guys
I would love to be, I love being alone. Just
well, that makes you sort of the anomaly, because most people, like I find, and I will like own for myself, like I do, like if somebody's mad, if I think Vanessa's mad at me, I'll start to like, all my stuff will come up, right? Like I have to self-soothe through that. It's not like I don't need anybody, but I think the work becomes like, as an independent sovereign being, I am actually always okay. And that doesn't mean I don't need relationships.
I was waiting for that kind of piece, because I do think it is tricky, and this goes back to what Taune said in the very beginning of this conversation, which is the intrinsic, like, we do need other people. Like, we are social creatures, and as like the animals that we are, maybe not like the elevated souls speaking here, but our very animal nature is we actually do need connection. We need other people. And so I think there's also nuance to what you're saying, Dené, which is like, we need to understand the difference between, and this is, I'm assuming, what you're saying about the dependence versus dependency, right? Like, dependency feels like, I can't survive if this specific thing is not in my life. And that could be alcohol. That could be anything, not necessarily a person. But being dependent, perhaps, maybe the differentiation or the nuance there is taking into account that we do actually need other people to survive.
Because we're not actually in relationship with that person when there's a dependency, from my perspective. Like, I'm using you as a way to meet a need, but I'm not actually, like, I find so many people are unbelievably codependent and have very little intimacy actually in their relationship.
Yes.
There's a ton of things I can't talk to you about, because if I did, I know for sure the relationship would be over. And that's not actually healing connection and relationship. That's not safety. I don't feel safe with you. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Taune, what do you think?
Yeah, Taune, talk.
I feel like that monkey with the symbols a little bit. I feel like an object. Just kidding. No, that for me is a yes and, because we're Americans, America. And so then we're like, that feels inherently to me like hyper individualistic. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps, go be a capitalist, make all the money for yourself, throw the middle finger up to everybody. And so I'll just say it, for me on my healing journey, it's been a lot about recognizing systems of collaboration and care, not just actually human, but animals and nature and God, what that means for me, like a beautiful sunset or experience of bliss and awe and wonder. And that is really nourishing, because I love aloneness. But maybe similar to one or both of you is I can be alone and be happy. And so for me, I feel like on this life journey, and for many folks that I work with, the hard part is actually leaning into depending on other people.
Well, I love that, and I just want to add, because I think this is an important distinction. To me, the dependency on one specific person, thing, substance is the issue, whereas I think we should all have an entire toolkit full of things that we use to work through the hard things of being alive. My therapist walks in nature, a higher source of whatever my understanding.
Higher self, whatever,
but I think that so often that is not, and that is where it is. Like, the codependency is like, I need to have dependency on one specific thing in order to be okay.
Yeah, and I see that again as like this capitalistic patriarchal culture or mononormative of like, no, one person needs to be everything for me, and then that person is going to die, like you said, Vanessa, or that person is going to cheat on me and I'm going to feel like I want to die or whatever. It's like, no, there needs to be a nested model of attachment, like nesting dolls, where we recognize we're full sovereign beings, we're souls, and we can when we do feel full, we can help others in their fullness too, but it has to come from not a grasping place, which I think you and John talk about, Vanessa. And that feels different too, and feels very related to what you're saying today, that I agree with.
Love it.
Yeah.
I love you, ladies. Let's make this as serious, because I could just like sit here and talk soul shop with you both all day.
I know.
I love it.
So good.
I love you both.
Me too.
So if this is something that you guys feel like you want more conversations around, Vanessa and I are leading an intensive in January 1st through the 6th. Just want to like throw that out there in case you're thinking about it, but we're going to dive deep on like a more, tangible work through it level about all of the things that we're talking about.
Right.
Yay.
Yay. And if you don't already, follow Miss Connie.
Yeah.
I'm going to tag her. I'll tag her in this live too, because she's rad, y'all. Until next time, ladies.
Okay. Thank you. Happy Halloween, belated.
Bye,
Bye.
guys.